Here are the components with a brief description and image suggestion. The clutch system. Core clutch components. 1. A flywheel. A large, heavy metal disc bolted to the engine's crankshaft. It has a smooth, machined surface for the clutch disc to engage and usually a ring gear for the starter motor. A circular, often cast iron or steel component, with bolt holes in the center for the crankshaft, a smooth outer face and teeth around the edge. 2. Clutch disc, friction disc. A disc with friction material on both sides, splined in the center to fit onto the transmission input shaft. It often has springs, torsional dampers, to absorb shock. A thin, circular disc with a central splined hub and spring assemblies. The outer faces are covered in a dark, fibrous friction material. 3. Pressure plate assembly. A spring-loaded clamp that bolts to the flywheel. It presses the clutch disc against the flywheel, engaging the clutch. It contains a diaphragm spring with release fingers. A metal cover assembly with a central flower petal-shaped diaphragm spring visible. The outer edge is where it bolts to the flywheel. 4. Release bearing, throw-out bearing. A bearing that slides on a sleeve. When the clutch pedal is pressed, it pushes against the center of the pressure plate's diaphragm spring, releasing the clutch. A small, cylindrical bearing with a central hole, often mounted in a collar or sleeve. 5. Clutch fork, release fork. A lever that pivots inside the transmission bell housing. One end pushes the release bearing, the other is moved by the slave cylinder. A metal lever, often shaped like a tuning fork with one end shaped to cup the release bearing. 6. Pivot ball, fulcrum ball. A small ball-shaped stud threaded into the transmission bell housing, acting as the pivot point for the clutch fork. A small, mushroom-shaped metal stud, usually with threads on one end. 7. Pilot bearing / bushing. A small bearing or bushing pressed into the center of the flywheel, or crankshaft end, that supports the tip of the transmission input shaft. A very small ball bearing or a bronze/brass bushing, usually just a couple of centimeters in diameter. Clutch actuation system. 1. Clutch master cylinder. Converts the mechanical force from the clutch pedal into hydraulic pressure. A small cylinder with a reservoir, sometimes integrated, sometimes separate, and a pushrod that connects to the pedal. 2. Clutch slave cylinder. Converts hydraulic pressure from the master cylinder back into mechanical force to push the clutch fork. A small cylinder, often with a mounting bracket, and a pushrod that extends to press on the clutch fork. The transmission system. Manual transmission components. 1. Transmission case housing. The outer shell that encloses all the internal gears, shafts, and other components, holding the lubricating fluid. The robust metal housing, often cast aluminum, sometimes with an internal view showing the shafts and gears. The front section is the bell housing where the clutch resides. 2. Input shaft main drive gear. The shaft that receives power from the engine via the clutch disc. It has splines for the clutch disc and a gear that drives the countershaft. A shaft extending from the front of the transmission, with splines at the very end and a gear behind the splines. 3. Output shaft. The shaft that transmits the selected gear's power to the drive shaft or differential. All driven gears and their synchronizers ride on this shaft. A longer shaft, typically at the rear of the transmission with various gears and synchronizers assembled on it. 4. Countershaft, lay shaft. A parallel shaft with a series of fixed gears that mesh with the input shaft gear and the driven gears on the output shaft. Image search manual transmission countershaft. A shaft with a series of gears rigidly attached to it, running parallel to the input and output shafts. 5. Gears, drive and driven. Toothed wheels that mesh to transfer power and change speed/torque ratios. Manual transmissions typically use helical gears for quieter operation. Various sizes of gears with angled teeth, arranged on the shafts. 6. Synchronizers, synchro rings/assemblies. Complex assemblies that match the rotational speed of the gear to the output shaft before engagement, allowing for smooth, clash-free shifting. A unit consisting of a central hub, a sliding sleeve, and a brass or bronze blocking ring with conical friction surfaces. 7. Shift forks and rails. Shift forks engage grooves on the synchronizer sleeves to move them. Shift rails are rods that guide these forks. Metal rods, rails, running through the transmission with Y-shaped or H-shaped pieces, forks, attached, positioned between gears. 8. Reverse idler gear. A small, intermediate gear that is temporarily moved into mesh between the countershaft and output shaft reverse gears to reverse the direction of rotation. Manual transmission reverse idler gear. A single, small gear, often on its own shaft, sometimes shown in isolation or in a diagram illustrating its position. 9. Speed sensor VSS vehicle speed sensor. An electronic sensor that typically reads the rotation of the output shaft or a specific gear to send vehicle speed data to the ECU. A small electronic sensor, usually plastic and metal, often with a connector that threads or clips into the transmission case. 10. Selectorlever, skifter, och linkage. The lever inside the cabin that the driver operates, connected by rods or cables, linkage, to the shift rails/forks within the transmission. The interior shift lever, sometimes showing the rods or cables that connect it to the transmission. Automatic transmission, key differences and components. 1.